The Bobby O Show.
Welcome to the Bobby O Show. My name is Bob O. Potzner, and I have a show today dedicated to artificial intelligence. We've done some prior shows with my guest, Rick Lawrence, on AI, artificial intelligence. We get into that topic again today, focusing after a little bit of an introduction to AI, a little bit about, or a lot about, the impact AI will have on our society based upon statistics and other information. But before I get to Rick and before I get to the topic at hand, I must start again, unfortunately, for the second week in a row, with a moment of silent prayer now for a second person who was murdered in Minnesota by ICE. May Alex rest in peace, and Renee as well. Let's take a moment of silence prayer for them and for America. God bless America. Rick, sorry that somber note to start the show off today. But give us a little background about yourself, because some folks may not have seen you. And I think you're my second most attended guest on my show. The head is Michelle Phillips with a dozen appearances. I think you've been on about now 8 or 9 times, I think.
Oh, I think I'm in double digits.
Double digits,
yeah.
Okay, and it's costing me a lot of money.
Oh.
And various topics. We did COVID, we did AI. Talk a little bit about your background, please, Rick, for those who don't know who you are.
Okay, so let me go all the way back to the beginning. Again, let me touch on things sort of that have some connection back to AI. So my undergrad was at Stanford. I was a chemical engineering major. By the way, I had planned to do 2 things at Stanford. One was to major in physics and the other was to play golf. And I managed to play freshman golf, but I discovered that there was no way I was going to major in physics and play golf. So I abandoned both, gave up on golf on the golf team, and went on and majored in chemical engineering. I went on to get a PhD in nuclear engineering because I became very interested sort of in computational science and doing all sorts of cool things with what were high performance computers at the time. An interesting connection back to AI. My PhD thesis had 0 to do with artificial intelligence. An interesting connection is that I took my PhD defense in nuclear engineering, I'm dating myself, in January of 1979. And in March of 1979 was the infamous 3 Mile Island nuclear accident that effectively ended all construction of new nuclear power plants in the US. So I hung around nuclear engineering for 6 or 7 years and then moved on to various things I'll talk about in a moment. But what is rather interesting, I never expected that it would come full circle, that there would be this revigoration and this re-emphasis on nuclear power because of the massive power consumption. We'll talk about that a bit if we get time, due to the construction of AI data centers. So now we hear lots of proposals for new nuclear power plants that are very different than they were certainly back 50 years ago. So as I say, I moved on from doing computational science, computational physics, to a long tenure at IBM Research, where I increasingly went from moved from computational science to data mining to predictive modeling, and ultimately overseeing machine learning, a subset of artificial intelligence at IBM Research. It was a fascinating time. I think it's always fascinating to work in those fields.
Can I ask you one question?
Sure.
You mentioned your nuclear involvement as a PhD was 46 years ago, if my math is correct.
Correct.
Was there any kind of artificial intelligence that was in existence or being used at that point in time?
Yeah, so interesting question. Going all the way back to my time at Stanford, there was a fellow named John McCarthy there who was, Geoffrey Hinton is the grandfather of Geoffrey Hinton, who won the Nobel Prize for Physics last year in recognition of his work in artificial intelligence.
Did he keep his Nobel Prize, or did he give it away to a president? I just was wondering.
That's a relevant question these days, but I'm pretty sure he hung on to it.
Objection, Your Honor. Objection sustained.
Yes. So no, I hadn't thought about that. He probably hasn't thought about that either. But seriously, back at Stanford, there was person there, John McCarthy, who was, if Jeffrey was the godfather, was probably the great-grandfather. And one of my favorite experiences at Stanford when I was an undergrad, I spent 24/7 in the library. They had this little ancient teletype that was the first chatbot. And you could go type in questions to it and give you answers. And as I used to always say, you would type in a random question and largely get a random answer. You could ask it, you know, will the sun rise in the east or the west? And it'll come back and say, let me get back to you on that.
What was the source of the data when you typed it?
Perfect question. There was no data. It was basically people trying to instantiate in rules sort of human thinking, which, yeah, you can have a rule, an object called the sun, a verb rises in the east, okay, and put that together, assuming that you can parse the question to realize that that's the answer. That was back to my PhD. That was the state of AI back then.
That's amazing.
And what fundamentally changed AI is the internet, because the internet all of a sudden made available massive troves of data, and where AI had failed all the way up till 1990. Was that it had to be very tightly programmed by humans to try to instantiate everyday common human understanding, human intelligence, into rules that could be executed by a computer.
So why did the internet, which came into place when 1990 something?
Mid-90s.
Mid-90s. Really. So why did the internet impact AI?
Because all of a sudden, a bunch of companies came online, most notably Amazon, eBay. And what did they do? They provided a web interface for their customers, us humans, to interact with it. And every time we interacted with it, we did something. We did a transaction, we clicked on some link, we did some action that was logged into their database. And after a few trillions of those kinds of operations over the next few years, we had a massive amount of data, by the way, a trivial amount of data compared to today, but enough data that we could start to build machine learners, and AI people were absolutely ecstatic because they could abandon these simple rules like the sun rises in the east to just go and see text, and by the way, maybe find text on a Wikipedia page, remember that came online in the 90s, that said, indeed, the sun rises in the east.
So bring you back to your background, get us to the point where you became, I don't want to see the word expert, because in law, we cannot call ourselves experts under the Code of Ethics.
Right.
So we'll call you an expert. When did you get involved heavily into the AI field?
So I would say that probably in like the early 2000s, which hard to believe that's approaching 25 years ago.
Is that amazing? I thought the internet was going to blow up in 2000, right? That
Yeah.
night, New Year's Eve, were you part of the party? Oh my God, we're going to have, all my money's going to be ruined in the bank situation and all, and nothing happened.
So one cool project that I led when I was overseeing machine learning was that Twitter was just coming online then. And there was a lot of interest in general in Twitter, but indeed, could you extract meaningful insight? Could you predict elections by just looking at what was happening on Twitter? So we got access to what was called the fire hose then, which was a garden hose, a fire hose of data, which was maybe appropriately called the fire hose then. Now it's more like a little trickle out of a faucet compared to the bandwidth, the information flow on the internet. So we got access to this, and we built some very cool models to try to define what topics were being discussed in Twitter, and then assign like a sentiment or some sort of feeling, if you like, some sort of context to that, to be able to then try to extract sort of insights into what could happen around elections, around politics. And by the way, I mean, I actually did have a clearance at the time. The U.S. intelligence community, a top secret FCI clearance, because there was a lot of interest in the intelligence community about whether or not you could take this information and try to infer potential events of interest around the world because of weak but interpretable signals on the internet.
Let me summarize where we are before we hop up into what we're going to talk about more today. So around 1979, there was some sort of AI, very basic, probably some little guy in a back room, if you ever seen Kramer on Seinfeld talking about what movies are being played, and he would read it to you, but some basic information. In the mid-90s, the internet becomes more critical to our society, and the AI grows some with the internet. Am I right so far?
Correct.
And then how do we get to this boom of AI taking over all the headlines and all the activities in our society?
So, very good.
What
So-
year roughly?
So what kind of happened then is the data continued to grow. Machine learning techniques, which are basically techniques, mathematical models that can define an objective function, like recommend films to Netflix viewers, something that we personally see every day. And it basically, because there was more and more data, because Netflix had a whole bunch of data like who watched what, so they could use that to do inference on what film you might like based on what you've seen so far. So that continued to evolve, I would say, all the way up to D-Day. When was D-Day? D-Day was in November 2022 when ChatGPT was first became public. And there we're talking a little bit sort of what we'll talk about in the definition of AI, but that was a seminal day in the history of AI because that transitioned us from understanding large volumes of data, which had been dominantly the source of the focus of AI up to that time, to now generating new data. What do we mean by new data? New text, new videos, new computer code, new whatever.
What's the source of the data that gets into AI?
It's still dominantly what's available on the internet, and largely what we've come to expect and of course in the background all the time we've been using Google, so we had very, very efficient search algorithms that could help us locate very precisely information that we're looking for on the internet. But still, while we had that data, we didn't have the sophistication of the models to actually generate new text. We were very, very good at analyzing.
To generate new what?
New text. So rather than
Not texts.
text, T-E-X-T.
Yeah.
Like, for example, writing a legal brief.
Okay.
Up until this time, certainly AI was capable of understanding, sort of, giving you some insight into what's in a legal brief. I'm trying to tie this back to your profession. What AI has done now is it's given the capability to a system to write that brief and to now generate content that traditionally was generated solely by humans. Now, there's a long debate, and of course we've had this discussion, and it's an important discussion. Well, what do we do with at what point do we start to regulate that content that is no longer being generated by members of the bar and by trained lawyers, but by AI that has never been trained as a lawyer, but rather has seen a massive amount of information, more information than you could ever digest in your life.
We're going to get back to that because I want to get back to your theme, but I will tell you that, as I mentioned to you before the show, I'm on the Connecticut Bar Association Executive Committee of the Family Law Section and Educational Law as well. But we had a meeting in the Family Law Section last night talking about a new proposal for the practice book, which is the book that talks about the rules of court in the state of Connecticut, not federal court, but state court. And there's a consideration of a new practice book section exactly about AI, which I'll get to in a few moments. So let's get back to your slides, because you always have the best slides. So let's go to slide number 1, and you'll take us, what is slide number 1? And it's going to talk about the history of AI a little bit. What is AI to the concerns we have with AI?
Right. So
Slide number 1, please.
Slide 1, please.
Slide 1, please.
So I've touched on several of these points here, but let me reiterate. So artificial intelligence, so there's 3 layers here. Artificial intelligence as it existed up to November 2022, and then generative AI, which is where we are now, and then sort of the future. So AI is a definition that's been around for decades, a theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence. So as we mentioned, recommendation systems like Netflix are certainly an example. Traditionally, these systems have gotten better. They now play chess better than humans, Jeopardy better than humans, and Go, a game that's orders of magnitude more complex than chess. So that discipline, that learning evolved and continued to evolve substantially over the years. And then when ChatGPT, the first of the so-called large language models, was introduced in November of 2022, I would suggest, as I mentioned before, the world really changed. We went from basically a system that could understand large volumes of data to systems called generative AI that actually can generate this content, as I mentioned, text, images, audio, video, and computer code. And under the covers are astonishingly complex algorithms that greatly build on some of the earlier
What's an algorithm?
An algorithm is effectively a mathematical prescription that will take a given input, transform it, and then produce an output.
So if someone puts the name Bobble Potsner on AI, how do we know that the information that AI generates tells the truth about me when it says I'm 28 years old, for example? How do we know? Because people tend to rely, you see in the internet,
Yes.
see in the newspaper when we were young kids. So how do we know, what verification is there for someone who takes this AI and uses it for whatever purposes, even in sports now? Analytics is done big time in baseball, basketball, football, et cetera. How do we know the information is legitimate?
Because I think, as ChatGPT is quick to remind you at the bottom, AI is not always right. Now, increasingly, it's more right than it has been in the past. It is monotonically getting better, so it's less likely to make an error on your age now, certainly than it was many years ago. Remember, a lot of that is the age that is represented someplace on the internet, the correct age. Because whether it's Google or in a traditional search mode or ChatGPT, it's relying very heavily on that existing data. So that data, unfortunately, there are many cases where incorrect data has been indexed on the internet and stays there. And if that's there, then unfortunately AI can learn from it. So where we are now, sort of moving forward, if we can go back to that slide.
You want slide one still?
Yeah, we're still on slide one. I just want to touch on sort of what the next step is. We've gotten through generative AI. And by the way, I'll often mention ChatGPT, which happened to be the first large language model. That's the generic name to these AI systems. But you should also be aware that there are quite a number of other very comparable systems. Claude from Anthropic, Gemini from Google. By the way, that's what you use that's under the covers of a Google search now, Perplexity, and so forth.
Excuse me, in the practice book section we talked about last night, it's a draft, it's not been adopted yet. It talked about including but not limited to ChatGPT, CoCounsel, Google Bard, Neve, Harvey, Ironclad, Bing, and similar commercial technology. What are those other names?
Boy, I don't recognize a lot of those. I think they might be specific to the legal profession.
Probably.
They're not generic chatbots. You can't go, have a general session with them, I assume. So the last one is the Holy Grail. This is what's called artificial general intelligence, sometimes just abbreviated as AGI. That's the type of AI that basically matches or surpasses human cognitive abilities across a wide range of cognitive tasks. So we're not just playing chess, or for that matter, writing a legal brief. We're just doing essentially everything that a skilled human would do. Now, we're not there yet. And there's at least two debates in the community. One is how long will
What community?
In the broad AI community, there's at least two ongoing debates. One is, when are we going to get there? And there's a wide distribution of responses there, anywhere from 5 years to a couple of decades. Maybe some people say we might never get there. But the more technical discussion now is simply stated, can we get there with the existing large language models?
What is large language model?
Large language model, think of that as the technology underneath any of these chatbots, ChatGPT, Claude. They all use somewhat similar technology, which is a large language model. So a very prominent figure in the field, Yann LeCun, is at NYU. And
name again, please.
Yann LeCun was up until recently, was at Meta. And he has basically left Meta because he has been a very vocal critic of the assertion that these large language models can get us all the way, can get us to true general intelligence. And what he's arguing is that these models need to be greatly expanded, and his argument in a nutshell is, this is not the way this is not the way babies learn. And this is not the way that humans learn. Humans still learn by lots of experiences. A baby learns to recognize stuff because they're told that this is something. Maybe that's a little bit like AI. But they have a much broader context, he was arguing, than the kinds of internet data that we talked about before that's training these models. So he does not believe that the data that we have and the techniques that we have are sufficient to get there.
I think, am I correct in saying you're talking about book learning versus common sense day experience?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, because these large language models, I mean, it's an oversimplification. They kind of fit into the book learning observation, because they learn from information, they learn from videos, they learn from everything that they can quote unquote see. Babies are different, you know, and you know, was it Yana said that, you know, we don't teach people how to load a dishwasher. Right now, a robot still can't take the dishes off your table, put them in the dishwasher, put the soap in, turn it on, wash the dishes, take them out, and put them in the cabinet.
Now
But
that
yet,
would be a great invention.
right. We'll come back in 5 years and assess the status of that. But your 5-year-old can do that. Did you teach the 5-year-old every single step of that? No. They just watched the mom and dad do that for the first 5 years and said, and probably because they were told to do it, I'm going to do that. Okay? And I think what Jan is saying is that's the sort of experience that's missing. It'd be analogous as if you found somewhere on the internet instructions, how do you do the process that I do, you know, from clearing the table to putting the dishes away in the cupboard. How do you do that? Well, I guess it's there. And I guess if I went home and asked ChatGPT, ChatGPT would explain the process to me. But there's no robot right now that you would trust to do that in your home.
So when you put your hand on the stove and it's hot and you burn your hand, you don't need to read that in a book. It's your experience of having done that, so you don't do that a second time.
Right, right. So it's a sort of a technical term is maybe a multinomial sort of information space that again, Jan is saying that we are only probing a small part of it, and we can't expect to come to replicating humans, again, over a wide range of cognitive tasks, if we're limiting the insight that goes into that learning process.
Let me ask you a philosophical question. Why do we want to imitate humans? I always give Rick questions that he does not expect, and he's thinking about that. If that's the goal, then tell me, why is that our goal?
I think you could probably answer that as well as I do, but since you asked me, I will take a shot. I think it's because the view among humans, at least humans on this planet, excluding any human-like beings that could be elsewhere, is that humans are the ultimate signature of intelligence on this planet, and therefore a system should aspire to replicate the intelligence of that most intelligent being. I suppose if we were exposed to another range of intelligence, perhaps from somewhere other than this planet, maybe our aspirations would be quite different. But I would assume that that's it, because our whole human experience is based on human, among other things, human learning and assimilation into society. And a lot of that assimilation, a lot of that learning comes back to our native intelligence. So I think, I'm just thinking out loud here, that the incentive to make AI like humans is because we want AI to replicate as much as possible, and we're way short of it, of that whole human assimilation experience.
I think what we're getting into a little bit later in the show is that, I'll use an example. When the atomic bomb was created and all the mathematics and science that went into creating the atomic bomb, that was for, quote, a good purpose, unquote, to try to end the war, et cetera, et cetera. But having that ability to make an atomic bomb has caused a whole lot of future problems in our society. And with the AI thing, the objective may be very positive to things that could be done, to maybe have things done by a robot that a person could do more sophisticated things. But if we're not careful in how we utilize the AI information and how we use the source of AI, we better be careful, because that could have the same kind of negative implications that atomic weapons may have had. That's just my theory. It's not a right or wrong, it's just my theory.
I think it's a very valid theory, and I've often heard AI compared to where we were with nuclear weapons in August of 1945, okay? Now, two observations. Number one, either by miracle or important security protocols, we have not had a subsequent detonation, hostile detonation of a nuclear weapon on this planet. You know, knock on wood.
Not to the level of Hiroshima.
Right, not to Hiroshima. I mean, we've tested them,
yeah,
but
right.
we've never had a nuclear weapon used in a warlike setting. I would suggest that it is perhaps easier to safeguard nuclear weapons than it is to safeguard AI moving
Now
forward.
let's transition from that, because now your next slide is going to get us to that point. Slide number 2, please.
So this is just a little bit of background on what people are doing with AI now, and I think we were both surprised to see this result that 63% of American adults have used AI, quote, at least several times a week. So it's up to the person to decide that they satisfy that, and effectively 2/3 are doing so. 63%. This was back in September. That's pretty amazing. When I give talks, as I mentioned, I ask people how many people use it, and everybody raises hand, but they've self-selected to come to that.
Are you in the 63% group?
Barely. No,
I am not. I am
Really?
not anywhere near that percent.
Yeah.
Now, of course, how you define several times is a factor. What is AI as a factor? Is the internet counting as AI?
Right.
So, but those numbers astounded when I saw this
Right.
clip.
I think a lot of people, as you know, when you type in a Google search now, you see an AI return. So in some sense, anytime you type something into Google, you're using AI. And the other point, which I think is just as important, maybe more so, 64% of American teenagers, that's age 13 to 17, have used AI chatbots. Okay, and in fact, if you
So what's a chatbot?
a chatbot is a ChatGPT, Claude, usual suspects. If you further segment that, not surprisingly, the use among 16 to 17-year-olds is much higher than the use of 13 to 15-year-olds. Now, this leads to a discussion that I continue to morph my own thinking about, and that is, what is the optimal way in which teenagers should interact with AI? Probably as recently as last June, I think the last show we did, I would have argued that it's absolutely important that teenagers have full access to AI, that they'd be embodied in their learning and so forth. But two things have come to mind since then. One has been this nagging feeling that students are not going to acquire critical learning skills, most notably like writing and doing basic mathematics, if they're relying on AI. The other, which I think is becoming more and more of a concern, not only among teenagers, but among adults, people are forming very, I would say, harmful relationships with AI chatbots.
Let's come back to that.
And that I think is, and there are tragic examples not too far from here of that. And I worry that this is that there's a double exposure here, both in terms of the impact on learning, but the impact on social development.
I have a couple comments on that. First of all, I spent 15 years, as you may know, on boards of education, 9 years in Shelton, where I grew up. Some folks might say I didn't grow up yet, but I was 24 when I was first elected to the Board of Ed in Shelton, where I grew up, and then 6 years in Richfield. So I have a very close affinity to education process. And last week I had on my show the superintendent of schools from Danbury and the chairman of the Board of Education. I've got Richfield coming on in a couple of weeks. AI is a large part of it, and I will tell you, as a person who's hired superintendent of schools on the Board of Ed, I've hired a lot of people in my legal profession. My observation, I think it's sort of a general observation, is that people don't seem to write generally as well as they did years ago. And part of it is because we text, part of it because we email, and these factors of kids learning how to do things in AI, I think there are concerns about whether we're going to get those basic skills that we all know. However, when calculators came out, I'm sure the people who were the parents at that point in time said, wait a minute, if you're doing 10 times 10 on your calculator, you don't do it in your head. So these are always things to be concerned about. The question is, as a society, how do we control the usage of AI and have guides in that regard? Which brings us perhaps to slide number 3.
Yeah, so this is some other polling data. I'm not a huge fan of polling data. I prefer hard data. But I think the polling data is interesting because the takeaway here is that, well, there's two takeaways from this slide and the previous slide. Americans are using AI more and more, and they have lots of concerns about it. So I think it's generally understood that Americans are using it. What I think is being missed in our national discussion, people are starting to get worried. Look at that first bullet. Only 17% of American adults, that's 1 in 6, think AI will have a positive impact over the next 20 years. 71% are worried that AI will, quote, put too many people out of work. We'll talk about some data.
You missed a word. Permanently.
Permanently.
That's a big word. Yep. That's part of that.
80% of Americans say the government should prioritize AI safety, even if it means slowing down the development of AI capabilities.
I could not agree with that statement more. Instead of having a lot of the baloney that's being studied by our country in terms of who won an election in 2020, which is 6 years ago, let's focus upon the AI and figure out what are we going to do, because what happened in 2020 isn't going to change anything, but what's going on in the AI is critical. That's my political comment. Go ahead.
Well, I've got some data that amplifies that concern later on.
If you want to support me on anything, always support me.
Well, let me wait till I show the some harder data. And the other one is interesting, given we all are experiencing personally increases electricity prices. 58% of voters believe that AI data centers, remember we're building data centers throughout this country. We spent $365 billion last year invested in AI data centers. They're coming up everywhere, at least everywhere the community will allow them. And what 58% people believe that the AI data centers are very or somewhat responsible for increasing the price of electricity of households. So,
by data center you mean if we're going to use power, whether it be wind power, sun power, whatever electrical power we're going to have, we need to have more data, more power for the data you'll need.
In a nutshell, these models require massive, mind-boggling amounts of compute power. This compute power requires both cooling, water cooling, by the way, billions of gallons of water, and electricity. By the way, we're talking about to power just several of these can take the entire output of a full-scale nuclear power plant in this country. We still have them operating. They generate 1,000 megawatt electric. That's what it takes. So,
what kind of water? Can it be seawater?
It can be seawater. It can be. It just is used as cooling. It may be desalinated beforehand, but it's massive amount of water. These run so hot they can't just. In the old days, like any computer around here will have air cooling. Okay, well that's not going to work because these chips run very, very hot.
Oh, time out. So wait a minute. So now let me ask this question. Once the water does this cooling, are there contaminants in the water?
No. It's kind of like a nuclear power plant where there's in one design, there's a set of water that indeed is exposed to radioactivity. And then there's another loop that's isolated from the first one that runs clean water that remains radiation free. Think of it the same way here.
What about the water that has radiation? How do you get rid of that water?
Well, then that's a whole different discussion that we've never had in this country, which is how do we deal with the radioactive waste? It can be extracted and then stored on site, and there's never been a good solution for how to use it.
Under the Bobbio and Rick Lawrence, well, I'll tell you my theory. Under the Bobbio theory, we have to worry about not only the source of the electricity, but also what we're going to do with the environmental impact of the contaminants that are in the water. Is that what we're worried about?
I wouldn't worry so much about the contaminants. It's just a matter of assembling that mass of water that's needed to power these things. But my takeaway, Bob, on that slide there is that people, when you start polling them, you hear all of these things out of Washington, how it's great, we're building all these data centers, and the focus is, we've got to beat China. And by the way, I have a slide that basically addresses that. I mean, that's a reasonable objective, by the way, for economic reasons. Whichever country has the leadership in AI, there's a tremendous economic benefit to them, not only in terms of what they can do internally, but what they can export as services.
I raised this issue about the environmental impact, not because I know the answers and not to be controversial, but rather this is part of my theme, that our society, our government needs to be focused on these kinds of questions. People who know more than I do, they don't know more than you do, but people who know more than I do about what we're going to do with this situation. And people like you who are scientists need to be able to talk about it, and we need to have governmental policies that are bipartisan. They don't favor the Democrats, Republicans, or independents, but rather we got a plan for the future. Comments,
please? If we get to a chance, I have a very nice plot that shows power generation in the U.S. and China over the last 25 years, and we are way, way behind.
That's coming up. So
that's coming up. But my takeaway from that polling data is that Americans are expressing a very different sentiment about AI than what you read in the general press. Well, now, of course, you're reading more and more about concern about electricity prices, jobs, and so forth. But I don't hear the administration talking about any of that. And if I were such a person concerned about AI, I would not be reassured when I see the administration, and now I'll be slightly political, I think literally investing very heavily in billionaires who are running these AI companies and by the way, are doing a great job creating the technology, without sort of the guardrails that I would suggest that somebody, most notably the government, needs to start in place. And you may know right now we have no federal regulation on AI in this country, and we can come back to that point as well.
The other point also is that who is going to pay for the construction of the sources of the power that we need? My experience has always been that the electric companies pass it all on to the consumer, and so the consumer's going to get all those bills as part of their bills for electricity usage, and the billionaires, maybe someday trillionaires, are going to be getting all the benefits for that. And by the way, my electric bill went from $250 the prior month to $310 this month, which is a mere 20%, and no one moved into my house in that period of time.
Correct.
Just so you know.
Correct.
Let's go to slide.
So let's go to
slide 4.
To the next slide.
Slide 4, please.
Yeah, so this is a discussion that I often show at talks, which talks at a high level about the interaction between the economy, jobs, and education. So this is the view of the world that I would suggest existed up to 5 years ago, before ChatGPT came on the scene. Our economy would grow, it would create new jobs. What were those jobs look like? They were largely dictated by the economic structure then. A perfect example is the internet. We created the internet, it created a bunch of jobs. Those jobs largely leveraged all the technology, the new startups, the dot-coms if you like, that were sitting on top of this internet. And the system worked perfectly. We had an educational system down here at the bottom, to the right, provided the job skills that was necessary to support that economic growth. Most notably, we turned out Java programmers, base programmers who could go to work for e-commerce companies like crazy. And then what happened, we talked a lot about this, all of a sudden as the internet grew, we got more and more data. Our educational system started creating PhDs and machine learning that then drove new innovation. And that in turn cycled back into the economy, back up to the left, so we've gone this whole circle, so that we were driving new innovation in the economy, and that's exactly what led us to AI. That new innovation created by that first instance of the internet, producing more data and then producing the methods on top of it to drive business impact, business value, and therefore economic value. This system worked great, and like I say here, our educational system's not perfect, but it did foster the innovation and the research that we need to drive this. And the other point that is largely lost in the current discussion is that this has been largely driven by immigration of very highly skilled workers in this country. And if we have time, we'll come back to that.
And by the way, I can't tell you who the people were exactly who got the scientific technology to make the atomic bombs, but there were a lot of foreign people who were not United States citizens who were involved in the process. And so immigration somehow in our society is such a very negative connotation, when in fact that's been a large part of the development of American society.
I believe it could be argued that Germany would have developed a nuclear weapon first had they been able to retain their leading scientists who came to the U.S. out for obvious reasons. And that is a lesson that has persisted, that we rely very heavily on immigration. Because our economy, I think people underestimate how much science and technology has driven the U.S. economy over the last 25 years. So if you start to throttle that back through, frankly, some of the initiatives that we can talk about later, that is going to start to impact our economic growth.
Rick, I just want to finish up with slide number 4 because we are going to be running out of time. And let's go to slide number 5, which takes the education issue and the economy issue to another level. So let's go there to slide number 5, please.
So this is the view of the world that we're increasingly seeing courtesy of generative AI. So again, we're going to have economic growth like we did before, but that growth in the economy is no longer going to guarantee more jobs, more human jobs. It's going to more likely have tasks that instead of being done by humans are going to be done by AI, okay? And that changes the underpinnings of our economy immediately and our educational system, because now our educational system, instead of producing Java programmers, like I said we did in the .com, we're going to have to train these workers to interact and optimize their tasks side by side with AI. Other than, if we don't, then AI will increasingly take over more and more jobs. Then
let's slow down for a second. So if I understand you correctly, before AI has become more significant, there were many, many jobs with software designers. Is that the right phrase?
Correct.
Okay, and what did software designers do in a nutshell?
In a nutshell, they wrote the code, the programming languages that executed instructions on these servers that enabled basically all these businesses to run.
Now, does AI make some or most of those jobs as software designers irrelevant?
Exactly, and we're going to skip over it, but what we have seen in the data that's been analyzed by a study at Stanford, already we have 20% fewer computer programmers in this country than we did in November 2022. Excuse me, 20% fewer programmers in ages 22 to 25. Why? Because we're no longer hiring those programmers because that code is being written by AI.
Now, let's just advance this, because theoretically, as you get more progressive in society, the human mind theoretically has to deal with difficult, more complex issues, because there's not the same need for software program designers. Is there some kind of designation of things that need to be done to make AI work that is a job that people with skills would be doing to enable AI procedure, or does AI do it itself?
So that's an excellent question, and in fact that's in the data. What is not affected so far are the kinds of people that I think you're describing who see the bigger picture. They're the architects who still design these systems. In fact, their jobs have increased over the time since November 2022. It's entry-level programmers that are being cut back. And by the way, as you know, in corporate society, we hire people, they become more and more skilled, they become technical leaders, they become managers, they become executives. If we're not hiring those people today, 4 years from now, we're going to be the people that would normally be at that mezzanine level if they never got hired in the first place.
So the question then becomes, if there's not the same kind of entry-level jobs, not just in the field of software designers, but in any profession, how are the young people in our society going to come out of college with some kind of skill in which they're going to be hired by some firm, let's say a law firm, accounting firm, whatever, to learn the basics to grow to the managerial level? Does that question make sense to you?
Yeah, and the answer that's simple to state but harder to execute is these people are going to have a deep practical understanding of how AI is capable of doing their task, and demonstrate that if AI were to generate a solution to their task, whether it's writing a brief or writing a piece of code, and a human like them were to do it, that when that human, that applicant, works with AI, that result is optimized. Because if they can't demonstrate that, people are going to go with the AI system over the human, because the AI system shows up for work every day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now here's the point I want to make here that really concerns me about the future is on the left-hand side here. Our economic growth is going to be driven by AI productivity, and this productivity is going to be enabled by an increasingly smaller subset of highly skilled workers. So we're talking about the PhDs and the software programs who are developing these systems as we speak. And if you look further down the road, I'm talking 2, 3, 4 decades perhaps, there's now this ongoing discussion, well, what is going to happen in an economy where we have maybe 4 or 5% GDP growth, although that because of AI that remains to be seen. What are we going to do with all the people who are no longer working because their jobs have been taken by AI? And you may recall the concept of UBI, Universal Basic Income. It was made popular by
Universal Basic Income.
It was made popular by Andrew Yang in the 2016 presidential elections. That's the idea that government basically pays people to almost do nothing. And Silicon Valley, of all people, have suggested that this is the way our society will operate, that we will generate so much wealth in this country, we won't even need to employ these people.
Well, wait, now we're getting back to, I was a political science major, now we're getting to something that might be deemed to be, quote, communism, unquote, or socialism. For example, wasn't there a theory that said, from each according to his or her ability, to each according to their needs? That was from communism, I believe. Stalin, Marx, whatever. I don't have my books in front of me. So what you're saying to me is what has concerned the Americans who say they're afraid of AI, is that if we're going to have this great plan of AI utilization, we need to make plans so that people can be trained. We don't want to, for example, I would think, have the society not grow. We want medical research, for example. We want new research, new innovation, et cetera. But if we're going to have that innovation, we have to have the ability to use AI as a guide. And I will give you an example. About 3 years ago, my buddy from Duke Law School, Rod Dillman, we were there for a Passover with several of my classmates. And he said, Bobbio, you draft premarital agreements, correct? I said, yes. He said, give me the 10 or 12 most important points of a premarital agreement. I said, it's not going to work. I said, just I'll give you the 10 or 12 points. I gave it to him, and he produced 2 years ago, a premarital agreement that was about 55 to 60% what it should be. It wasn't well written, but it was okay. I'm assuming there's been developments in that process, but a lot of people are doing things in a lot of different fields. Saying, well, I can go to AI, this is good enough document. So I guess perhaps lawyers are going to be doing more post-marital problems because the agreements are not right, but I use that with a smile on my face because that's going to happen in each and every field that exists. And if we don't plan, and the question is going to be later in the show, what the hell do we do? What the heck do we do? Because you can't stop progress.
This is true. This is true. And by the way, I want to just make it clear, there is enormous uncertainty about a lot of things that we're talking about. I mean, I'm expressing my personal point of view, but I just want to make it clear, nobody has a clue what things are going to look like 20 years from now. I have 2 grandchildren on the age of 3. If you ask me what their education and career trajectory will look like, I can say I have no idea because they will be entering college in 16 years from now.
Well, remember the theme we were in the 60s, if you're not part of the solution, part of the problem.
Yeah,
let's go to your next
so
slide.
I think, how much time do we have left?
A little under 10 minutes.
I think maybe this is a little bit detailed. I've kind of talked at the high level about this. So if we could go to, I think, slide...
how about slide 7?
Slide 7.
Is electricity need?
Yeah, so I've already made the key point here, so let's skip over this.
How about look at slide 8 for 30 seconds?
Yeah, so again, we've been talking dominantly about lawyers, software programs, and so forth. Well, guess what? Robotics is advancing as well. So now we're not talking just the algorithms, if you like to go in a large language model. We're talking about robots, most notably robots in Amazon distribution centers that will basically fully process an order. They'll identify the order, go pick the item, go package it, and make sure it gets shipped. And that's why Amazon, in fact, today Amazon laid off another 16,000 workers at dominantly corporate jobs.
How recently was that?
It was today. They not laid off 16,000. It was announced today, and I believe there was 14,000 a month or 2 ago. Now, I think these jobs are largely corporate, but quite clearly what they are aspiring to do is move more and more robotics into their distribution and therefore employ fewer humans doing that task. So again, the thinking has been it's the high-end, skilled jobs like, computer scientists and lawyers. It's coming down. The robotics will bring it all the way back down to being able to do tasks like we see it, in an Amazon worker in the distribution center.
A robot cannot be as cute as I am. Go to slide number 9. How about slide number 9? That talks about will the U.S. retain a competitive advantage?
So what I wanted to do here, Bob, I wanted to talk about point number 1 and point number 4 because we talked very briefly last time about, I think, the courtesy of NVIDIA. We talked about that a bit. The U.S. has the dominant lead in the chips that power these systems, and courtesy of ChatGPT and so forth, I would say we have the lead in these AI chatbots. So let's not kind of get down in the weeds there. I have 2 big concerns. Number 1 is how are we going to power these things? We talked about that a little bit. And number 2, and that to me is the most important thing, is everything that has to sit on top of this stack of technology, if you like, that is the policies and the workforce, that is going to actually drive productive economic and societal impact from generative AI.
What's a semiconductor chip exactly?
Semiconductor chip is a piece of technology that's very, very complex, but is key to implementing these very high performance AI capabilities. So without NVIDIA is our ace in the hole, if you like, in this, because it can do these calculations much faster than, for example, chips manufactured in China.
So then why did our government just sell chips to China?
Because we sell everything except the high end. This keeps going back and forth as to whether or not we're going to cover that under export regulations. And right now, the policy du jour, because it changes, is that we are still barring NVIDIA from shipping their high-performance chips to China because that is a competitive strategic advantage.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds on slide number 10, which is electricity generation, because I want to get to slide number 12, which is the executive
So
orders.
real quick, so again, in the context of China versus US, this is the total electricity generation in China and the US over the last 25 years. You see a pretty dramatic difference. US is largely constant. By the way, that's not because we're incapable of generating more power. That's basically what the demand has been. Demand has been largely flat because of energy conservation programs and so forth. The takeaway from this slide to me is down in the dashed lines are the power in the US, in China, from renewables. And if you look at that plot, renewable energy produced by renewables, that's dominantly solar and wind, geothermal and so forth, dominantly solar and wind, renewable energy generation in China is approaching the total generation capacity in the US. Okay.
Say that again, please.
If you look at that dashed line,
The red
given
one?
a couple more, that red dashed line, that's China's renewables, is about to intersect. And now what's going to happen is the blue line up, the solid blue line up above is going to move up. It has to move up if we're going to power these AI data centers. But that line from China is starting to approach the US. That means that they
Approach
are
the US what?
in terms of electrical generation. Their renewable electrical generation is approaching our total generation.
Which is critical because we have a president of the United States now who doesn't like windmills because it affects the view of the ocean. And this is a problem because we're going to have, China has, according to your information, almost as much renewable power as we have in our power in total.
Correct.
And let's leave it at that thought.
So we'll leave it there, and let's go to the next slide.
Slide 11, which is about
So this is about policy. So what has happened in the U.S. as of October 1st is U.S. science has been decimated.
25. October 1st.
2025, last October,
Yep.
okay, new fiscal year. So these are some of the cuts. Most notably, NSF, National Science Foundation, used to be $9 billion 2 years ago. It's $4 billion. And this is a direct quote. So reduce climate, clean energy, woke, social, behavioral, and economic policies. But
whatever woke is.
Whatever woke is, and I'm the last
We're not
person.
getting-
I'm the last person to have an informed opinion on woke. Now, this is some key points here. U.S. federal funding has been cut by 22% for all research, 34% for basic research. Since we're talking about China, China was expected last year to increase spending in research by 10%. Why does this matter? Because the innovation is going to come from the scientists who are sitting on top of this AI stack and are inventing new vaccines, new climate models, new healthcare protocols, new everything. And if we cut these research programs, we're in trouble. And I just wanted to leave with one other thing.
We have to go
Okay,
through
very
it.
good.
We have 2 minutes left. Go to the next slide, which is slide 12, because this one is really critical.
So-
anyone who's watching this show, you should freeze this frame for a moment because this lists a summary of the executive orders that have been generated by our presidents. And I want to start with number 8, if you wouldn't mind.
Sorry, Bob. Let me just mention, Biden actually had a very useful executive
was that?
order, okay, in October 2023, which basically spelled out 150 different initiatives that the U.S. government could take. That was thrown out by Trump on day one. Now, what Trump has gone through and issued a bunch of executive orders, a couple of them are actually useful, advancing AI education for American youth. That's useful until you realize there's no new appropriation behind that, okay? We are now preventing woke AI in the federal government, whatever that means. So
Well,
that's
it says here, seeks to ensure AI systems acquired or used by the federal government are politically neutral, whatever that means, and free from ideological bias, particular policies like DEI,
Right.
diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is a pure political BS as far as I'm concerned, because whoever is going to be in charge of our country by voters is going to be determining a lot of the things about AI, and that number 7 really bothers me. We'll go on from there. You have any comments
But
about
here's
that?
the context I would put in, and now I'm going to be political. What we are seeing in this country, and let's take the dial back of the Smithsonian Institute, we are rewriting the history of this country based on executive actions and action from the federal government. Now let's transition that discussion to AI. What we are proposing here is that we are going to do the same thing to AI. We are going to constrain it to reflect a very distinct, and I would suggest, a set of policies that are inconsistent with reality. I will leave you with that.
Well, here's what I'm going to do. We're going to come back for show number 85 for you, but we're going to start here next time because as part of the political process I've been involved, I'm a big voting activist, et cetera, et cetera. There's an old expression that says, vote and the choice is yours, vote and the choice is theirs. Vote and the choice is yours. Vote and the choice is theirs. What that means is if you're unhappy with certain policies and the lack of AI policies and procedures and where we're going to go if we have the woke issue at the foremost of what we're analyzing versus job issues, whatever, we're going to be in trouble. Maybe not for our generation, but probably so it will be, but certainly our kids' generations and the grandkids' generations. So having given you this depressing commentary, I want to thank Rick Lawrence for your very detailed information, your knowledge you provided to us, and let's all be smart and work for the best of America. God bless America. This has been Bob Opatzner with Rick Lawrence. Thank you very much, Rick. God bless America. This has been The Bobby O Show.